Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Joe Armstrong. I'm a veterinarian, and I am the Cattle Production Systems Extension Educator at the University of Minnesota. Today, I'll be joined by my colleague, Melissa Runk, and we will be talking about nutrition and how it relates to reproduction in your cow-calf herd. If you're interested in information like this, we have a podcast available. We talk about both beef and dairy on that podcast. It's called The Moose Room. It's hosted by myself, my colleague Brad Hines, and my other colleague Emily Kreckelberg. So please check that out if you have time.
In regards to reproduction, we often use the term pre-breeding nutrition to refer to how we're supposed to be feeding our females prior to breeding. But pre-breeding nutrition, that really implies that this isn't something that you have to worry about until late in the game, or it's something that we really only focus on, at a certain time during the year. However, it's something that we need to be managing correctly throughout the year, but becomes very critical at certain production points, such as when we're trying to get that female bred. So, what should we call it? What's the correct term? Well, let's just call it nutrition. In regards to nutrition, those decisions that we're making in one part of the year are going to be impacting, how we can manage things throughout the rest of the year. An example of this would be, how are you storing your hay in the summer months when you're putting up that hay and you're either putting it in the shed or you're tarping it or whatever? That's going to impact what you have access to be feeding during your late pregnancy, management. So, what is the goal of a cow-calf system? Of course, we all have different objectives within our own herds, with our own operations, but essentially, to be profitable, we all want the same things. We want to get our cows pregnant. We want to keep them that way. We want to have them return to estrus as soon after calving, because every day that that cow is open is essentially costing us money. We want to have live calves on the ground. We want to have a healthy calf. We want to keep those calves alive until we sell them. And of course, most of us, usually get paid by the pound. So we want to have that calf hit the ground running, be growing incredibly fast. We want them to stay healthy, and that all ties into our dam's health and nutrition. But what we're going to focus on today is really going to be on how are we getting those cows pregnant and maintaining that pregnancy.
So this slide is a representation of everything that I find important for calf health. And I've ranked them. And I think we need to rank them because everyone has limited time and limited money. There's no way to work on everything at once. It's not practical. So this is what's most important and ranked in order of importance. So when we look at this list, there's all sorts of things, and we're not going to get into calf health today because we're talking about nutrition and how it relates to reproduction. The point is, when we look at this list and we talk about nutrition, there's a lot of things on the list of calf health that are directly dependent on dam health and nutrition. And specifically, the top three are what we're most concerned with: colostrum, dam health and nutrition, as we just talked about, and calf nutrition. All of those relate back to dam health and nutrition. So when we take care of the cow and we feed her correctly, we are not just impacting pregnancy, we're impacting that calf and its health. So there's a lot of benefits besides reproduction in taking care of mom. There's a lot of things to think about on a cow-calf operation. This is the way I like to think about it because everything's interconnected, and decisions at certain times of the year affect other times of the year. It's a system. There's no way to take a piece out and isolate it and say that decision is not going to affect the rest of the year, because every decision does. I like to look at it this way, in a circle, so that I can see everything at once, and this is my attempt at doing so. Let's look at an example of how a decision at one time of the year affects not only the rest of the year, but the following year as well, and potentially the success of your entire heifer program. One of the things when we look at this diagram is you can see that heifer calving is offset from cow calving by 3 weeks. And that's on purpose. Heifers take longer to return to estrus, so we're giving them an extra cycle so that when we're looking ahead, we know we're giving them all the advantages when they have to join the cow herd. We're setting them up for success, because the last thing we want to do is take that heifer, knowing they need extra time, breed them at the same time as the cows, And then when she comes and joins the cow herd, she's already outside of that first 21-day window. She's into our second or third cycle in that window. And we know that we're not setting her up for success because our most profitable cows, our most profitable heifers calve in the earliest they can in the window.
So, in regards to nutrition, the nutritional impacts on reproduction, we have some major or key areas that we need to be considering. That is body condition, our energy intake, her protein requirements, and minerals and water. We're really going to focus on in this presentation body condition and how to monitor that, how what impacts varying levels of energy intake have on our reproductive efficiency, and then we'll just briefly talk about some of her protein requirements, and we'll touch on the others. Body condition scoring is it's a visual appraisal tool, and in beef cows, we use a scale of 1 through 9. In dairy, it's 1 through 5. And what it is we're just visually looking at that female to assess her degree of energy content that she has stored within her body in terms of fat cover or adipose tissue that she can draw on those energy reserves throughout different production stages in the year when she really needs that additional energy. Typically, we don't see the varying ends of the spectrum where one, the lowest number, that would be a female that is severely emaciated, and 9 on the other end of the scale would be something they call morbidly obese. We really don't see very many of those. We're more worried about those cows that fall within the 2 to 8 condition scale range. Ideally, where we wanna see our females at is a moderate body condition score of 5. We wanna see our younger females typically in a condition score of 6. We'll talk about that later, why that's important. But a body condition score 5, and we call that moderate body condition, that's when we can visibly see those last 1 to 2 ribs. They're just barely visible. In terms of changing body condition scores, a body condition score is to change that, it's based on a percentage of her overall body weight. So that's why there's a variation in how many pounds we'd have to add to her in order to move up or down the scale. But it's roughly about 80 to 100 pounds. This is a very handy visual tool that you can use and should be using all throughout the year and at varying production stages in that cow's life. But it's really important to make sure that you train your eye. There's a number of visual aids out there that are easy to access if you just Google that or go to, of course, go to the extension page and you can find a how-to video on how to do body condition scoring. But it really comes down to you got to train your eye, and then different factors of the cow can be a little harder to assess actual score. But things that make it a little more challenging are things like the age of the cow, what's her coat color, what stage of gestation is she in, how the length of her hair coat. Is she all shed out? Does she still have her winter coat on? And ruminal fill. We don't want to confuse ruminal fill or how full her rumen is, how much outward turn to that rib when we're comparing it to actual condition or that fat cover. So the points to evaluate on the cow to determine what body condition score she's in, just starting at with number one, down her backbone or over her spine, throughout the tail head, from hooks to pins or her hip bones. The easiest place to really start is at the ribs, and again, starting at her 13th rib and working forward to see how many we can visually see, and the brisket, but that can get a little tricky on older cows. This slide here shows body condition scores 1 through 9, and it shows the varying levels of fat deposition on that animal. Here's a real life body condition score example. This is a mature cow. And on this cow, it's relatively easy to assess her fat cover because she's completely shed out. Darker hide colors, when we get to those dark browns or those blacks, and longer winter hair can make assessing that fat cover challenging. But the first place that we want to look at is starting at the 13th rib or farthest away from her head and count how many ribs are visible to the eye. If we can visibly see the last 1 to 2 ribs on a cow, remember that puts us at a body condition score 5 approximately. On this cow, we can just make out the last outline of her last rib, which is going to bump her up into the 6 score. She has some fat cover over her hip bones on her hooks and pins, and we can see that she has some fat cover around her tail head. Now, in a study done by Cook and others, they looked at the effect of body condition score at the start of the breeding season on reproductive performance and overall productivity in Bos Taurus and Bos Indicus beef cows. What this study was looking at is that, essentially just broke it down to cows that were in a body condition score that was less than 5, and then or they were at a body condition score of 5 or greater. You can see what the averages were for those condition scores in the two different groups. And this graph shows that in the various breeding systems, we can see the differences in the conception rate of the two groups of cows based on their varying body condition scores, where the score of less than 5 is in gray, and the condition scores that were either at 5 or slightly above are in red. Some of the main takeaways done in this study was that the cows with a body condition score of 5 to 6.5 at the start of the breeding season had a higher chance of becoming pregnant. They calved earlier in the calving window. They had a higher weaning rate, and overall, they were just more efficient. Those cows that were calving earlier, we had more days to be growing that calf. They had more pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. In another study that was done by Perry and others done out in South Dakota, they looked at the changes in energy levels of feed provided to cows both prior to and post calving. And what they used in this study were 70% of NRC requirements for energy levels and 150% of NRC levels. The design was set up into four groups. So cows were either losing body condition score before calving and also losing it post calving. They were losing body condition score prior to calving, but gaining it after calving, or they were gaining body condition score pre calving and then losing weight following calving, or they were gaining and gaining. So this just shows what were some of the impacts of that change in energy levels, both prepartum and postpartum, that energy level and what impact that had. So we got the four different trials set up that way. Some things to point out in this was that those cows that had or were set at that 70% or that low energy prior to and following calving, something that really sticks out there is that in terms of the percentage of females that were cycling 150 days following calving, there were none of them that were cycling at that time. Another thing that sticks out is that those cows that were in, that they had a lower body condition score prior to calving, but then we increased that plain of nutrition following parturition. You can do that. That's an option for trying to remedy a bad situation essentially. But they had the longest return to estrus or postpartum interval of the study group. And then if you go to the third column here, the cows that were, had high energy levels prior to calving and then low energy levels following calving, they had a very low percentage of females that were actually cycling at that 150 days. So some main takeaways from the study, poor body conditions scores just meant that, took them longer to come back into heat. They saw a decrease in the birth weight of the calves and overall calf performance was down. The females that were losing body condition score pre-calving, they had a longer return to estrus if they returned at all or if they were even cycling at all. And then, of course, they saw a decrease in calf performance. The cows that were losing body condition scores after calving, they had a decreased percentage of cows that had ovulated, which of course means less cows pregnant. How do we fix these? What are some of the management strategies here? We want to keep our cows either at or slightly above that body condition score of 5. We want to be maintaining or gaining body condition score pre-calving. That is the most economical time to try to be adding condition to that female is prior to parturition. Once she has that calf, her energy needs are incredibly high because she's got to worry about quantity and quality of colostrum, peak milk production. She's heading into that. And then also, we of course want to get her bred. She's got to have enough energy to start cycling. And her energy demands are going to be even higher if she's a young female who's doing all of that and then she's still growing herself. But, we want to be maintaining body condition score post calving or potentially gaining. But that is probably the worst time to be adding condition to that cow just because it is so expensive once she has that calf her energy needs are so incredibly high, and we're feeding her, and a lot of that energy is going straight into the calf. So, what prevents, a female either maintaining or gaining post calving? Well, we're not meeting her energy levels for her stage of production. Or, maybe we're off on she's a bigger female. She's has some really high energy demands. If her net energy for lactation, if she's a high milking female and that net energy for lactation is incredibly high, and we're not meeting those requirements, then it's going to start to draw on those energy reserves that she has, and she's going to lose weight. Also, another scenario is when we have a young, growing female who just, again, she has such high energy demands because she's trying to do everything that a mature cow is doing, plus she's still growing herself, which is why we recommend keeping those first heifers, calving them in a body condition score 6, knowing that she's going to have to draw on those energy reserves following calving just because those energy needs are going to be so high. Again, just to reiterate, body condition score of at or higher than a score of 5. We want to be maintaining or gaining body condition score pre-calving. Again, the most economical time to do that is mid-gestation to late gestation so that she doesn't have extremely high energy demands following calving. And then we could either want to be maintaining body condition score following calving, or we could be gaining, but again, it's incredibly expensive at that point. But just maintaining a stable body condition score is by far and large the simplest thing to do, just to make sure that we don't have to play catch up at different production stages and try to pour the feed to her to try to get her where we need to be to make sure that she is cycling and conceiving and staying pregnant. So for dairy cows, we want to see them at that 2.75 to 3 on the body condition score scale for dairy cows. On beef cows, we want to see that at 5 for mature cows, 6 for our younger females. And we don't want to see a loss in condition following calving. Just some of the economics of fat cows and what impact that has on their return to estrus or that postpartum interval. This was some of that data that came from Houghton and others, and this just looks at what body condition score they were in and when they started seeing them returning to estrus. And we can see that there is no statistical difference between the body condition scores of 4, 5, and 6. But something that really stands out is that body condition score of 7. Well, it only took them 30, 31 days or so to return to estrus. So that's really ideal, isn't it? The data shows us though that yeah, that looks great. Like holy cow, they were cycling right away. But this is just returning to estrus. This on the next slide, I'll actually show you the pregnancy rates. This is just means that they were cycling at that time, and those fat cows return to heat by far and large the quickest. But can we or do we need to maintain them at that body condition score of 7 just to see them start cycling sooner? The data tells us that we do not need to maintain those females at a body condition score of 7. When we look at the study from the Houghton data, this looks at the body condition score status on pregnancy rate. And what we look at, we can see that those cows that are in a body condition score of 5 or less and increasing can attain a 100% pregnancy rate, as well as those that are at a condition score of 5 and maintaining. We lose pregnancy performance when we're decreasing body condition score, especially when we have that score that is below 5. But condition scores above 5 and decreasing can also decrease our pregnancy rate. And also, this just points out that our overfat cows, they are not going to have the most desirable pregnancy rates. They only had 75% of those cows in that category that became pregnant in this trial. Just really briefly on our protein requirements, of course, we measure that in terms of crude protein, the measurement of the nitrogen content of a feedstuff. And this just shows an example of a 1,300-pound cow and the variation in pounds of crude protein needed per day throughout the different stages of production. So we're looking at our different, gestations, and then also, is she a light milker, moderate milker, or is she a heavy milker? And we can see how that fluctuates based on her output of milk. And on this slide, this is just a nice visual representation from Dr. Eric Mosel that shows a cow nutrient requirements, calving to breeding, and it just shows that the crude protein levels the months following calving, and we can see how increasingly high that is immediately after parturition, and how that starts to taper off when that calf, of course, gets older. When we get out to there to that 7 months, and how those levels really drop.
When we look at body condition score overall, there's going to be a range. The goal is to keep that range as small as possible. What we want to avoid is aiming for 5 and having this huge range, anything from 3 to 8. What that does when we look at success based on what we just talked about with Melissa on where body condition score should be for successful reproduction and efficient reproduction, this is not ideal. I put some colors on this graph just to show you who's going to be successful and who's not. When we look at this wide range, anywhere from 3 to 8 on a standard bell curve, you've got basically half your animals that are going to fall below a 5, and we know that's not ideal for breeding. And we have a small proportion that are going to be so heavy, they're also going to have a problem with breeding. So you really only have, let's say, a third, maybe just a little bit under a half of your cows that are going to be successful when it comes to pregnancy. So it's not just aiming for 5 or aiming for 5 to 5.5 or 6. It's aiming to get all your cows in that area, knowing there is going to be a range. You can't avoid it, but we want to make the range as short as possible. Here's what that looks like. When we take that range and we shrink it down, we want to squash this bell curve and make it flat, and then take our range and shorten it. So instead of aiming for 5 and having everything from 3 to 8, we want to aim for 5.5 and have only animals between 5 and 6. We need that uniform body condition to be able to make targeted nutrition decisions that apply to everyone. If we have a huge range, it's really, really difficult to make nutrition decisions that apply to the entire group, because you have to decide, am I going to feed for that skinny cow or am I going to feed for that fat cow, knowing they're all going to be eating the same thing at the same time. If I have a short range, I know that I can make a decision for the average animal in that group at 5.5, and I'm not going to impact my reproductive performance by making cows too heavy or too skinny. We just need to figure out how we're going to get our cows to a uniform body condition to begin with. What we need is for all of our cows to fall in the correct range so they're all successful, or at least we've set them up to have as much chance to be successful as possible. There's 2 forms of nutrition, on paper and on farm. On paper nutrition is incredibly important. We need to formulate these rations to meet the needs of the cattle. But just as important is what's actually happening on the farm. Are we delivering and are the cows eating what we put on paper? That doesn't always match, and I would say it's very, very rare for those things to match up exactly. On farm, we're looking at how you store your feed, how you mix everything, how it's delivered, and then big components of cattle behavior that can impact the entire group and how nutrition works between different animals. Let's look at an example of how we could set it up on a farm to create a wide range of body conditions, regardless of the fact that the ration is perfect. We can still create a wide range of body conditions on a farm just with cattle behavior. So in this example, I've got my bunk in green, the circles represent cows, and I don't have enough space for everyone to eat at the same time. When I do that, you can guess who is at the bunk. We also know who's not at the bunk, which is just as important. The cows at the bunk are always going to be your BFBCs, your big, fat boss cows. They are going to be there first. They muscle everybody else out of the way. That's why they're a big, fat boss cow. So what happens is that they're at the bunk, getting fatter or at least staying fat, and then my animals that are not at the bunk miss out. And who's not at the bunk? If we mix age groups, we're going to have our young cows miss out. Sometimes our very old cows miss out. Our skinny cows. Basically what happens is our young cows don't get to the nutrition they need. Well, they're growing and they're growing a calf, and our skinny cows stay skinny or get skinnier. That's exactly how we could set things up to create a huge range in body condition, that everything from a 3 all the way up to an 8. That tells me right away that we don't have enough bunk space. Here's an example in real life. If we look on the left here up at who's at the bunk, we've got a really big cow. That white cow is big. And if you look at who's not at the bunk and you look down the hill a little bit to the right, those are clearly our younger cows. So I don't even have to be in this pasture. I can make a diagnosis from the road that shows me there's an issue on this farm with bunk space. And what we're going to do is create a huge range in body condition. And my young cows specifically are going to miss out. That young cow is our most important cow on the farm nutritionally. She's trying to grow. She's trying to grow a calf. And in this situation, she can't even get to the bunk to get feed. What's even more concerning is that these animals aren't even trying anymore. They've been beat up so bad every time they try to get to the bunk. They've said, you know what? It's not even worth it. We'll just wait our turn if we ever get a turn, and we'll chew on whatever corn stalks we can find. We'll wreck fence by trying to reach through and get some other stuff, and then we'll eat whatever's sorted and left over in the bunk. This is why we sometimes sort for age. If we want to avoid the competition altogether, we take those young animals out, those animals that are at risk out, and we feed them separately. Now, that's not always possible, but if you're going to mix age groups, it becomes even more important that you get the bunk space right. Because again, these animals need the nutrition the most. And if we short them, it's going to impact your herd and your operation for years to come. This competition that we're talking about with the bunk happens everywhere, not just the bunk. There's competition for every resource on your farm. And cows guard resources, and big fat boss cows make sure that they are number one in line for every resource when possible. So it's really important, especially when we talk about winter housing, to know how we can mitigate or limit competition and have the appropriate space for things, so that if you are mixing age groups, and even if you're not mixing age groups, at least everyone has a fair chance, and we can create that uniform body condition that we're looking for. Because anytime we use energy for anything, staying warm, staying cold, trying to get to the water, laying down, getting up, trying to stay clean and dry, that all uses energy that is taking away from trying to be the appropriate body condition. And if there is a gradient in which cows have to work hard and which cows don't, you will see a range in body condition, just like if you short bunk space. Here's an example of an appropriately set up winter housing situation that takes care of the most important needs for cattle. The most important thing that cattle look at when they're looking at where am I going to be or where am I going to go is a windbreak. Cows will seek out a windbreak and prioritize getting out of the wind more than almost anything else. They will skip feed and water and that nice clean bedded pack if they can just get out of the wind. So windbreak is very, very important. And you can see examples of that on the top of the screen with the tree line. And then there's also some bales stacked in the tree line to help with that windbreak. So when it comes to these resources, including the windbreak, the bedded pack, water, and the bunk, there are minimums that we need to meet so that we can decrease competition as much as possible. The windbreak, at a bare minimum, needs to cover the bedded pack. That's really important. After that, our bedded pack itself needs to have 100 square feet per head. That's a 10 by 10 square per animal. I think when we talk about a bedded pack, heifers get a bad rap when it comes to calving. Yes, some of them aren't the brightest bulbs, and they choose to calve in a very, very weird place. But some of them get a bad rap. They calve in the mud, or they calve not where it's nice and clean and dry, not because they didn't know what to do, but because there was so much competition for that space, they couldn't. If you look at a bedded pack, The nicest spot, the driest spot is right in the middle. That's where your big fat boss cows are going to be. If that heifer needs to calve and she can't get to that spot, or she can't get to a dry spot on the bedded pack because there's not enough space, she's going to get pushed to the edge where it's muddier, it's wetter, and she ends up calving there, and we blame it on a heifer being not the brightest, which happens. But in a lot of cases, I think it actually has to do with competition. She doesn't feel like she has enough space on that bedded pack to calve, and she gets pushed to the edge. So it's competition again. The same thing happens with water. The same thing happens with the bunk, like we already talked about. 1 to 2 linear inches per head, I think, is a great number for water. That means a standard Ritchie waterer can cover 40 to 80 cows. I think that's pretty reasonable. And like we talked about, bunk space needs to be at an appropriate amount so that we can get to a uniform body condition across a group. And that appropriate amount is a minimum of 2 linear feet per head. That is the bare minimum. It doesn't come from nowhere. We picked this number up from the dairy side. Originally, some of the first recommendations based on research for how much bunk space there should be in a fresh cow on the dairy side was 2 linear feet per head. What we're finding out on the dairy side, at least, is that recommendation is bumping up. It's probably more standard to see a 30 inch per head recommendation on the dairy side, and some people are even going all the way up to 36. So 2 linear feet per head is the minimum on your bunk to have appropriate space for everyone to be able to eat at the same time. And here's what it looks like. When we put 2 linear feet per head into practice, everyone can eat at the same time. Now, the thing to note is that it's still tight. There is still not a whole lot of space between these animals. And you can see even on the picture on the left that a cow got bumped out. She's got to find a new spot. But this is what 2 feet per head looks like. It's still tight, so that's why it's minimum. But this group is a group of second and third calf heifers, and they are tight. Their body condition differs by maybe a half a point across the entire group. And it's all because they can eat at the same time. Another way to do this is to feed on frozen crop ground. It's a great option for housing cattle in the winter. They are hardy animals. They can be out there, and they don't need that much. A windbreak like we talked about, a bedded pack if possible, water, and appropriate bunk space. That's it. When we feed on frozen crop ground like you see in this picture, we can make that bunk as long as we want. And the waste is fairly minimal. So in this picture, he's using a bale chopper or a processor that they also use for bedding. So dual use piece of equipment. And now he's just laying a line of hay down on the ground. The cows can line up, they can space themselves out. Everyone gets a fair chance at the feed. And that's another reason that this group is so uniform in their body condition. The other benefit of this is that they haul the manure for you. Hauling manure is a lot of work, and it's a big job. It takes a lot of time. So if we can set it up in a way that we minimize how much we have to do that, great. So this is a great benefit of feeding on frozen crop ground. That manure is spaced out, and as long as you move where you put your hay down, the manure moves for you. Don't have to haul it. We're going to change it up now just a little bit. Talk about efficient hay use. Now I've got a picture of a round bale feeder up here in the corner. They're fairly ubiquitous across the industry. I think they are tools that get used inappropriately a lot. The purpose of a round bale feeder is to save time and labor, and I totally get that. But how many cows can really fit around this round bale feeder? 6, 8, depending on how big and fat they are, and that's who's around them, the big fat boss cows. And sometimes they don't leave. They screw around with the hay, they make bedding out of it and put it on the ground, and then they lay down in front of the bunk, again, even when they're not eating, potentially blocking and guarding that bunk from younger animals, skinnier animals, animals that we need to get that nutrition. So I think round bale feeders can be a very effective tool if used correctly. And the correct use of them means having enough space for everyone to eat at the same time. So I'm talking about limit feeding here on the slide. Limit feeding means that I'm going to give a set amount to a group for the day, and that's it. They're going to get a set amount, that's it. It's more efficient to use our resources that way, but it is super dependent on everyone being able to eat at the same time. If I give limited resources, I don't have things free choice, and I don't have space for everyone to eat at the same time, it makes that whole problem we talked about with a range of body conditions even worse. Because if it's not free choice, that younger animal doesn't even get the chance to get any feed if they're outcompeted for it by that big fat boss cow and there's limited amounts. Now, the cool thing is that we talked about already, and you saw in those pictures, is that we don't need a TMR wagon to make this work. Okay? I'm not talking about needing a bunch of fancy equipment to make it happen. You can have a processor and lay down a line. You can unroll bales. You can do a lot of different things that don't take a lot of expensive equipment to get this done. So one of the things that we can do with this round bale feeder and make use of this tool appropriately is we can limit access to the round bale feeder as a way to limit feed. This was a study done at Purdue where they actually limited the amount of time that cattle had to eat to see how much time do they actually need to eat and how much of that time, if we give them free choice access, 24-hour access, are they really just screwing around? Well, it turns out if you limit feed appropriately and you line these round bale feeders up in a row, you give everyone space to eat at the same time, and you do it, especially, I think one of the cool things in this project is that they made a gravel pad that they could scrape and keep clean so the cows weren't standing in mud while they did this. If you line them all up and you give everyone equal access to it and they all can eat at the same time, what they found was that if you give them 24-hour access to that setup, to that round bale feeder, 25% of that bale and 25% of what went into the round bale feeder is not getting in the cow. It's wasted. They're not eating it. They're pulling it out and putting it on the ground. And it turns out cows really only eat for about 4 hours. They eat and then they're done, and the rest of it is waste. Now, 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours is a really tough time if you have a day job to get home, kick the cows out, or let the cows in, however you want to set it up. So if we look at an 8 to 12-hour access, we're looking at about 10% waste, which is a lot better than 25% waste. So however you want to do it, give them access in the morning and kick them out when you get home, or the other way around, doesn't matter. But the point is, if you use this round bale feeder effectively, it can be a valuable tool. And if you give everyone space to eat at the same time, you can save a lot of hay by limit feeding, even using a round bale feeder. The other factor of efficient hay use is how we store it. When we look at a round bale, a 5-foot or a 6-foot bale, we're going to use a 6-foot bale today for an example, the outer 6 inches contains a surprising amount of hay based on math. And this is the same reason that you always order a large pizza. You're usually getting more pizza for your money. That outer 6 inches is the first part of that bale that spoils, the first part of that hay that goes bad. So if we store it outside for an extended period of time without any protection for it, and we waste the outer 6 inches because it's spoiled now, moldy or whatever else, that's 30% of that bale. So what I'm saying in this is that if we put everything in a round bale feeder and we give them 24-hour access, and on top of that, before I put it in the round bale feeder, I store it outside for an extended period of time and I let that outer 6 inches go bad, I'm wasting half of every bale. And with prices of hay, I think that's a really tough thing to swallow. And I think it's really, really important for you to think about how quickly could a building pay for itself, or how quickly could my time and my effort in making a gravel pad and buying a few more round bale feeders be worth it if I'm saving that much hay. So as we talk about hay and efficient hay use, one of the things we have to think about is the quality of the hay and when we feed it. One of the big problems that we can see with reproduction and calf health is if we short nutrition to cows in late gestation. And when I talk nutrition, I'm talking very basic, energy and protein. So if we short energy and protein in cows during late gestation, we have all of these things you see here. We get lighter birth weight calves, which you would think would be associated with less assisted calvings. But actually, the calves are lighter, but we don't see a decrease in assisted calvings or dystocias, and often we see an increase in that. We have lower calf survival, lower calf vigor, basically because they didn't get the nutrients they needed late in gestation as they were growing. Lower milk production from the cow, which means lower calf growth, less average daily gain, lower weaning weights, the whole works. And then on top of that, the cow is going to be delayed coming into estrus the next year. And if she continues to do that in a cycle, she's going to slip later and later in your calving window each year until she doesn't fit anymore and she leaves your herd. So what I'm saying is that there's decisions that need to be made in terms of hay quality and when we feed it. And some of those happen at times of year that you're not really thinking about it, or you might not be thinking about it right now. If we take our first cutting and we put it in the back of the barn, and then we take our second cutting and we put it in front of that, and our third cutting and we put it in front of that, when we get to a time when we need to start feeding hay, only our third cutting is available, which is usually our best quality hay. Now, is that the appropriate time to be feeding that best quality hay to our cows? And the answer is no. What we need to do is we need to have access to all of our hay at all times, or at least test it so that we know what's our worst hay, our middle of the ground hay, and our best hay. Because we need to decide when is the appropriate time to feed our best hay to our cows and our worst hay to our cows. This is how we decide. We look at the growth of the fetus inside the cow, and this is what that blue line represents. It's an exponential curve. It gets steeper as we get later in gestation. That last trimester, that calf is growing a significant amount compared to the beginning of the pregnancy. That's why energy and protein requirements are so important late in gestation. So I think of this curve, this blue line, as the energy and protein requirements for that cow. Now, if we add in a lactation curve to this, it looks like that. So if we have a lactation curve added in here from the previous calf, we can see that energy requirements from that lactation are tailing off, and then they end at weaning, and then we start to see the energy requirements for the growing fetus picking up. But as you can see on the graph, there's a spot in there where our energy requirements are incredibly low. And if you look at the months associated with that, we look at September, October, November, depending on your calving window, it might shift left or right. But traditionally, when we start feeding hay, our energy requirements are lowest in our cow. So there is no reason to feed our best hay. If we feed our best hay first, that's a waste of protein and energy that we need later. And that's why it's important that we stack our hay right, we figure out what's our best, what's our worst hay, and we feed it at the correct time. Because we can easily short energy and protein simply by stacking our hay incorrectly and feeding the wrong hay at the wrong time. Our best hay really needs to be saved for that last trimester when our protein and energy requirements are the highest. As we wrap up here, we got to talk vitamins and minerals. We're not going to get into it too deep because it's a whole presentation by itself. But here's some basics. When we talk vitamin and mineral programs, we're really looking for a complete year-round program. That is very important. Vitamins and minerals can't just be fed late in the game and post-calving and expected to impact everything year-round. This needs to be something that we keep up with year-round because it sometimes takes that long to see an effect. I'm a big fan of addressing documented deficiencies. It's really difficult for me to pay for a lot of extra stuff in my mineral, and it can get very expensive if I don't have a specific thing that I know I need. So we'll talk about that on the next slide on what you really need to do to document these deficiencies if you think you have one. A reminder here and a cautionary thing on the last two: fancy products don't fix basic issues. You can have the best mineral in the world. If you don't have enough bunk space, it does not matter. You're not going to fix basic issues with these fancy products. You really need to get to the root of the problem, fix that first. And then if you want to try to catch that marginal production by using some of these fancy products and deciding whether or not it fits your break even, go for it. But you got to get that basic stuff right first before those fancy products are really going to do anything. And then remember, a lot of the products on the market are designed for Western range conditions where we have really, really low quality and poor quality grass on pasture. That is not something we struggle with in the Midwest usually. Be aware of that when you're looking at some of the products that are out there. Is this really designed for me and my system in the Midwest, or am I looking at something that's really made for a Western range condition? So if I want to address documented deficiencies, how do I document those deficiencies? I like getting liver samples anytime it makes sense from a relatively healthy animal. So normal stillborn calves that don't have any issues, grab a liver sample. If we have an injury or an otherwise healthy cow, that's an opportunity, if we don't let her linger and we appropriately euthanize her right away on an obvious situation where that is required, like a broken leg, grab a piece of that liver. That's valuable information that assesses your mineral program and tells you where you are in that program, making use out of an animal that no longer is useful in a whole lot of other ways. It is possible to take a liver biopsy on a live animal. If you want to get a snapshot image of what's going on in your mineral program, we can do that procedure on live animals. It's incredibly safe, something you need to talk to your veterinarian about doing, but it's very, very possible to do. And then lastly, talk with your nutritionist. Keep them in the loop on what's going on. If you're testing feed, if you're soil testing, if you're looking at testing pastures, keep them in the loop. It's hard to develop a complete mineral program without all the information. So just make sure you're talking through all of that with them so that you can keep your cost under control, but still address the needs that you have in your system. With that, I think we're up against our time, and we are happy to answer any questions if you have them. Our contact information is there on the screen. Send us an email, ask us questions. We're happy to answer them. In addition to that, if you like the information we talked about today, please listen to our podcast, The Moose Room. You can find that anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you being here and listening to this. We look forward to hearing from you.